let's pack another one into the roster of pre-built video updates. This is going to be batching some of these up all on one night so that I have something for each night when the power goes out or um, life interferes with my ability to do a video update as to what I'm doing for my National Novel Writing Month. If this is your first visit to this concept, this is me random generating the entirety, well, not the entirety, the skeleton of my National Novel Writing Month project. Now, this is interesting in that it's in the process of doing this, we've sort of created more than one book, at least as part of the outline. So what we did was we did a random generation table here with the genre, subgenre, type, and then the basic outline of the story, in which we had rolled two options for a genre. So we went with fantasy and adventure. And for the fantasy subtable, we did wuxia, which was the Chinese martial arts fantasy. And then for adventure, we did steampunk. And then we rolled on the type table, and we got a puzzle story. And then we got in a world of mundane life, as mundane as fantasy ancient China is, the culture changes. There's a cultural change in the way. One young noble must gather a group of heroes to weaken the hooved, mechanical, scaly, humanoid, mask-wearing, science fiction monster with powers over the air. But can they overcome that monster, the villainous empress, which is preventing them from achieving their goal of weakening her by capturing and imprisoning the heroes, with the result that the hero must steal or liberate each of them from capture and then go defeat the villain, only to find, twist at the end, that the villain was not wrong. They were evil, but they were not wrong. So that's the premise of the story we're working with right now. That's a really long-winded, clumsy way of putting it together, but that's sort of what we're dealing with. And so the premise that we came up with is the setting is steampunk, so the villain is a monster assembled, a thinking machine, a thinking steampunk machine, wrapped in the remains of butchered mystical creatures, to present it as a living woman who will be the leader of a peasant rebellion against the empire. And in doing so will be the puppet of the outsider industrialist empires trying to seize control over the great, largest empire in the world, the great empire of fantasy China. It's not real world. So they're trying to seize control of this empire by controlling the puppet master, being the puppet master to the puppet that becomes the puppet dictator of the new empire that comes into its place. And our unlikely hero is Anastasia. No, it's a male noble whose family was destroyed when the peasant uprising was much like the story of Anastasia. The peasant uprising killed his entire family to overthrow the royal family in the area and seize the area for themselves. At the prompting and supplying of the outsider industrialists who were supposedly in alliance with this new empress, but in fact created her to serve as their puppet. And that puppet is sort of the equivalent of Rasputin in this story case. So that's where we're sort of starting from with the premise of this story. And in between there, we have the element of Robin Hood and Baron Munchausen assembling his crew of unlikely and unusual heroes to defeat the villain. And I think where I left it off last time was I was trying to assemble a more detailed understanding of who the individual characters were. So we have the monk, who is a healer, is into Penjin. It's sort of like bonsai, but it's miniature landscaping with water, rocks, and plant life, and sometimes little mini people and structures on the landscape. He's purposeful and commanding. And then we have the sorceress, whose ability is to blow the winds, or even a scream or a yell. And they're into prestige and reputation, or that's part of their modus operandi. And they have a character trait of fascination with fine fabrics and whatnot. That part I don't think plays a major significant role, so I'm not playing with it too much. The third character is a noble who can drink a river and disgorge a river from her mouth. She's in hiding because of being part of the nobility during the time when they were overthrown. But she's savvy and extremely good at negotiations and diplomacy. And then a craftsperson who's immune to being burned creates jewelry by taking the molten metal from the forge and sculpting it with her fingers. Yes, her. She may be impersonating a man to be able to function as a craftsperson, but her motives are creative. She wants her creativity to be recognized. And then those are the four heroes that are allies for the character. And what we have in the story that we're working on now is how are we going to do the timelining of this? And I said it in an earlier video that I feel like what I want to do is sort of Tarantino this. Kill Bill or Pulp Fiction. Both of those movies have that sort of timeline out of sequence tendency. And so what I've what I've sort of started with the idea of is the way we introduce the characters is they're already all together. And so to start the story, one of the things you hear some authors tell you in writing a story, at first thing you want to be able to do is within the first 10% of the story, you want to introduce the conflict. So 10% in is the life-changing event, the catalyst. 20% in, hero tries something new. 50% in, major turning point. 75% in, rock bottom. 80% in, resolve to complete the mission is found. And then you finish off the story in that sequence. That's a more Western approach to some of that. We were looking at the possibility of using a couple different methods of doing storytelling. And so we could do that. That's like a 5-act play or a 7-act play structure that you can build around that formula. 10% in, we have to introduce the life-changing event. But you have to establish first the setting by how you introduce it all. And it's oftentimes suggested that in order to do the story justice, you have to start, or to hook your audience, you really want to have what's called in media res, start in the action of the story. And so I've sort of started with my intro to the story is the heroes coming into a town being plagued by the forces of the oppressive empire, and they confront them showdown style in the streets, and the heroes are here to save the people from the empire of the Iron Queen, or however we refer to her. But the heroes come in, they introduce you're introduced to the setting of the peasants being abused by the empire of the Iron Queen that was their leader in their revolt from the peasants' revolt against the previous empire. And so we've introduced the setting, and then we introduce the heroes as they come in showdown style to confront the empire. And in their showdown with the empire, we see them each in their full bloom of ability to confront the empire. And during that scene, we're going to have a problem arise in the hero's strategy to work towards defeating the empire. And the main hero will remind one of the other characters about how they first met. And that's where we get a flashback to the first recruiting of one of the characters. And then we'll have a scene again where we do that again in this first story, where the scene of the conflict that we're in will remind us of the conflict that they're in now and what they had to do before when they first recruited one of the other members of the group. But we're going to have a scene at which things start to fall apart. And this is sort of that call to action, road of trials, the darkest night where things seem to fall apart, the recovery of resolve to defeat the villain, and then the climax of that particular story. what we're going to have here is we're going to have that road of trials, and part of that trial is introducing the first time they met one of the characters, the setback, the resolve to try to resolve it, and then we're going to have that moment be the moment where that break in resolve, that break in that dark moment is when the villain reveals that the main character, the hero, is a noble of the noble house that was overthrown. And in that revelation, all faith that the others had in their ability to work together dissipates. They're scrambling to escape on their own. And now that they're divided and they're not supporting each other and backing each other up and uncertain about whether or not they can depend or rely on each other, that's when the villain captures them one at a time. And in an attempt to escape, one of them is injured. And so the monk, the healer monk, will do their job to heal that person, even though it means they'll die while doing it. And so we lose the monk, we lose the sight of potential victory. This story goes to a setback, and all of the members of the hero party are captured, imprisoned, and sent off to be imprisoned by industrialists, outsiders, who were the four main industrialist outsiders who were serving the Empress. So they're given into the custody of some of the underlings of them to be imprisoned separate from one another so they can never unify to fight against the Empress power again. That is the end of episode 1. Episode 2 is rescuing the first member of the party, and in doing so, the rescue of the hero imprisoned by the main hero will be an action sequence and an event of storytelling that leads to bringing that captured hero out of imprisonment, and that person not feeling like they know who they're trusting or working with anymore, and the hero reminding them of how they first met. So we get a flashback again to a story of how they first recruited that hero, and then a subsequent storytelling. I don't know if it's going to be another volume or if it's going to be another chapter within that volume of another story of another hero that they rescue, and then setting out for the last hero to rescue, and then finding in that next story the turncoat, the outsider who becomes an ally, and their goal to overthrow and defeat the villainous Empress. So that's sort of the structure that I'm going with this storyline. So it's at least a duology, probably a trilogy, possibly a 4 or 5 stories involved. It depends on how we space out and how the writing spaces out, how we go after the setback at the end of volume 1. So with that in mind, volume 1 is the story of going to this town, confronting the villainous character, flashing back to how you recruited some of your allies, and the loss of the monk at the end of the first story. And I think that's pretty reasonably a good measure of how we're going forward with this as a story. But there's still some unanswered questions as far as we are going. I have a list of names We have Emerald Deception. I feel like that's the jeweler. The White Star. Spring Enchantress. I feel Spring Enchantress would have to be the sorceress. The Devouring Lily. I feel like that would be the diplomat slash noble. And the Enlightened Fist, I feel like, is the monk. And then the Outsider Recruit, he doesn't necessarily get the same naming style as the others. And I feel like the name Striker is both reasonably good as a Chinese martial arts fantasy character's hero name, as well as it is possible just to be William Stryker or Tucker Stryker or Tuck Stryker or whatever it is. That's the character's actual name. It just happens to work really well as a heroic identity. But that leaves us with the fact that the hero's name is White Star. And there's a part of me that's a little uncomfortable with the fact that the main character is named White Star in a non-white. There's a little bit of it that feels a little off, so we may do a change up on there. I do think, if I remember correctly, that in Chinese symbology, white is the color of death. I do think I'm not certain on that. I'm doing a search right now. Okay, so white represents the element of metal in traditional Chinese culture, also symbolizing purity and innocence. In some instances, however, white is associated with death and is a color commonly worn at funerals. Today in China, white is a popular color for consumer goods and is common color choice for cars. So I'm kind of curious. It does sort of fit. Like, if you start the character off as an innocent child of a noble family, the white is innocent. Their entire family is killed, and they have a sworn vendetta against their family's killers to kill them or wipe them out. Again, white fits the role. So it does kind of work. I do still have a little bit of discomfort with the idea that it's so West, Venus, White Tiger, contracting, autumn, dry, withering, chicken, peach, hemp. White corresponds with metal among the 5 elements and represents gold. Alright, so that's kind of weird. It symbolizes brightness, purity, and fulfillment. Light colored skin is highly valued in many Chinese, especially in consideration of women's potential brides. White is also the traditional color of mourning. So the White Star is the morning star. Not quite the morning star, but actually, they said Venus, the morning star. So it is the morning star, which has some additional confluence with some controversial meanings. The morning star, also known as Lucifer, So you got to be a little bit careful with some of this stuff. And like it's sometimes you just got to go with something that seems to work in a certain way, and you're not going to be able to escape some of the layered extra meanings for some of this stuff. And you can kind of see my green screen's kicking in on my green shirt. But so I do think the white star, morning star, I think it works. I think we'll go with it. But I will admit, it's a little uncomfy, but that's just a holdover for some of my anxieties about some of that stuff. All right, so with that in mind, we've got our character naming. And then we've got to determine, and this may be the only rolling we do in this one this time. Although I could pull up the Oracle and do a bit of a rolling about how we're going to address the storytelling going forward, but I don't think we need it just yet. In order of storytelling, I feel like the way we're telling the story will dictate better how the story goes from there. I don't think we need to randomize the actual telling of it, just the elements that we're using. And we're focusing on story one this time. We're not really looking to gun through to the rest of the stories involved. So, with that in mind, what do we need to do for today's random generation concept? Well, the white star is established as who they are, but we never did a list of abilities for them. Now, as the main hero of the story, it's sort of like, let's put it in the terms of like superhero comics or superhero movies, in a sense. If you take the idea of characters like the Avengers, each of these characters has an amazing ability that's interesting and worthwhile. But one of the things we have to come up across is there's not really an Incredible Hulk concept behind some of this. There's no gods or super powerful technology or whatever. I mean, we do kind of have all of that, but one of the things that we want to look at potentially is reining it in to a degree that the characters are heroic in a degree that makes them Hawkeye and Black Widow. And so part of that for me is, as we look at stories like the Avengers or other superhero stories, like you have characters who are just people and they're getting absolutely beat to crap. I think a better example of that would be sort of Daredevil. Daredevil has a power, and he has nothing beyond that power of echolocation ability. He's just a dude in a costume, and he gets shot, stabbed, burnt, thrown off buildings, bones broken, partially drowned. Like, they kick his butt, and no ordinary person walks away from those conflicts without a scratch. Like, a lot of the things these characters go through during the course of their adventures would permanently disable somebody who experienced one of those instances. And over the years, they've had hundreds of those encounters. They should be wheelchair bound, barely able to move their own fingers to lift up a cup. they should be completely unable to do anything for themselves at a certain point. But there's a certain level of resiliency that we're sort of willing to suspend the disbelief of. And so that kind of goes in with the equation of they're super preternaturally tough, they're determined, and when they punch harder than anybody else. When they need to get up the side of a building, they can get up the side of a building. Swinging up the fire escape, climbing, gripping bricks by the creases between the bricks to climb the side of a building, they can do that. They're just that good. So we'll have to just allow that that is part of the assumption of the character. But on top of that, somewhere in this mess is a list of powerful abilities that we will find out what White Star's ability is. And then I think possibly we can do a lookup, use some online generators for mundane names for each of the characters. So, not hero names. So let's just go do our thing here. We're looking for a D20 for our hero's abilities. Roll dice. I'm not looking until you see first. And this could ruin everything, honestly. Is that an 8? Grow in height. Oh, God. What a crap answer to generate. Oh, can grow in height. What a terrible, terrible result. That's their power. All right, well, I mean, it's Ant-Man. It's literally Ant-Man, but we're not going that big. This is somebody who can make themselves bigger. A looming presence is what they'll become. I don't think it bestows any additional strength on somebody. But I do think you could make for it to have some impressive scenes in it. Grow in size. I can see that potentially being a pull it out of your pocket when you need it kind of ability. But I think we're going to deal with a character whose predominant ability is just their toughness. I do think it doesn't really lend itself to the character's theme particularly well. I'm tempted to re-roll. So if we re-roll and I pull a 14, can heal any illness. That's the monk. We've already got that one. So I think we're sticking with the grow to any size. Can grow in height. Can we make it so that they can reduce themselves in any size? Yeah, the next one we rolled was immunity to burning. We've already got that. Although there is an element of it that makes me wonder if being able to be the replacement for the monk would be the way to go with the story element. For right now, we'll keep it at can change size. or change height, um, because that's what we rolled and that's what we're sticking with. But I feel like that feels like enough of out of character to not come up in the story at all, for real. Although I do like the idea of being able to shrink down and get through gaps and spaces. I think that could be useful in the story element of um, the idea of the character. And we did have a 20 on the die before we rolled, so 20 would be reverse of ability. But being able to reduce in size would explain how he got away as a kid from the slaughter of his family, and could be useful in getting in to rescue his hero allies from their prisons undetected. So that might be worthwhile going for. So let's do the next thing on the list, which was to create two male Chinese names for their mundane names, and two or three female Chinese names. Or well, two female and one androgynous, because they're passing themselves off as a man to be a jeweler. Okay, so Chinese name generator. That's not what we're looking for. Okay, why are you being so difficult right now? This is turning into a pattern that I don't appreciate very much. Ocean name, fantasy name generator. Can we find China? Chinese names. Come on, Dingus Berry. Stop. Okay, come on, dude. Seriously, work for me. Why is the internet copping out on me all day long? So, Chinese names. Can we just go? Okay, if you're gonna be a butthead about it, I'm not gonna waste any more fucking time. So, male names. Ren he. Ren he and go long. Ren he. I think we can go with Ren he. So we can go Ren he. Gao Yin. So Gaoyin. Those are our two male characters. So let's do a female character. Two of those. So we have Funa, Fu Wen, Meng Dai, Fu Wen, Meng Dai, Fu Wen, Meng Dai, and now a neutral name. So MENGDAI, and then we have FUWEN. Those are anglicized, obviously, because we do not have Roman alphabet in China of the time. So neutral names. Shaoxi, SHAOSHI. Shaoxi. I'll be very curious to see if those work. I would be very curious to see if any of those turn to be inappropriate terms. SHAOSHI. So that is what I'm gonna go with. I will do some looking up to see if any of them are inappropriate. Because I would hope they are viable options for going forward. But if they turn out to be inappropriate terms or negative connotations to them, I will potentially rework some of them. But for now, I do think that's a reasonable place to call it. I think we've detailed most of this out. This is episode 5 of the updates and planning process of doing the National Novel Writing Month novel that I'm working on. Turns into a novel series. But, c'est la vie, it is what it is. I will see you probably for 2 more of these as we go forward. And then I think potentially we'll call it 1 week of these videos for this story. I will do some work on it. I think what I'd want to do is, I hope that the first book doesn't actually make it all the way to 50,000 words. Because what I hope to be able to do is finish it off as a short novella that then I can use the rough draft that I drafted during National Novel Writing Month and a more polished version of it having gone through the editing process. And then the finished version in a single book, so you can see the process of going through it. And then we can kind of do that for the subsequent stories. I don't know if we have to do the exact same styling of the next subsequent stories, but I think we could do some sort of first draft and finished draft comparison, potentially with maybe some analysis of story structure style. One of the things I wanted to look and examine earlier was talking about there's an East Asian style story structure. It's the 4-part story structure. What do they call it in Chinese? So it's regional variants. There's variants of it in China. Was called Qichen Zune. I can't even pretend like I understand how to say that in an appropriate way. In Japan, I believe it has the name of Kisho Tenketsu. Kisho Tenketsu? Tenketsu? Shotenken. No. Kisho Tenketsu. Close enough. I can't do any better than that because I do not have any training in any of these languages. At any rate, it's a 4-part story structure with basically start or introduction, handling process or hardships, the turning point, and the result. That's the structure story-wise that they use. That's totally viable. It's interesting to note that in a lot of cases, story structure is retroactively applied to a story rather than informs how you write the story or the story unfolds. So there are elements of it informing how you compose a story just because that's the format you're familiar with as stories occurring in your culture. So we have a tendency to have 3-act and 5-act structures that we use a lot, but there are 7-act, and I've even heard 11-act story structure. I don't know. Word one, there's definitely like Save the Cat, and there are those different formats of story structure, and I do think it would be interesting to explore how that story structure comes to play in structuring elements, as well as story structure versus character arcs as part of the planning process of story writing. I think we can explore those as elements in subsequent stories that we do in the setting that we create here. That's just a thought. It's a crazy thought. But until we have something better to work on, I'm assuming I'm going to be dabbling with some of these kinds of concepts in the future. Right now, we've got one story to start with. Start at the beginning and work from there. Well, actually, that's not what we're doing. We're starting from the middle, doing flashbacks. Anyway, it is what it is. I will catch you for the next video. We've got 2 more after this, I think, and then we'll be done with the story building experiment that we did this National Novel Writing Month. Catch you then.